All right, and I'm back. Just straighten that up a bit. And there's a bunch of stuff I wanted to talk to you about, all sorts of things, Catholicism and blah blah blah. But actually, we're gonna skip all of that, and we're gonna go straight to the pyramids of Atlantis, because quite recently, and hopefully I still have the link somewhere. I'll put the link if I have it at the bottom of the video for a news item where some Portuguese guy has found a huge, and if the sonar picture that I've used as the thumbnail for this video is accurate, a really definitely artificial structure that's a pyramid. Now we need to give credit where credit is due. In the report of the news item, I think the guy's name is something Silva, some Portuguese guy with a boat, a fisherman, I think. However, I want to give this guy props. He wrote Atlantis and the Silver City. His name is Peter Dautre. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. There's his name anyway. Okay. Now, I've read a bunch of books about pyramids and aliens and blah 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 blah. There are really only about 3 or 4 books that I consider worthwhile when it comes to pyramids, Atlantis, and so on. First of all, if you haven't read the original documents from which the whole concept of Atlantis comes from, that's Plato, then you don't really know what you're talking about. So read those first of all, which I have done, and which is mostly why all the other stuff that I've read about Atlantis I just kind of dismiss as moronic. You know, there are people that are saying, oh, those big rock roads in Bimini are something to do with Atlantis. Then there's the guys that are saying Santorini was Atlantis and blah, blah, blah. No. If you read Plato, it's pretty clear that Atlantis was near the Pillars of Hercules, also known as the Straits of Gibraltar. And, well, guess what? Portugal is right there. Now, what this guy wrote about is, I would say that it's the only book that I've read that gave me an idea that he was right probably about Atlantis. So much so that a while back I went to Portugal and I went to see the very same city that he talks about, took some pictures, filmed it, went to the museum where there's the things he talks about, some an alphabet which is sort of unknown, that nobody has managed to decipher really, although it has some familiar symbols on it. And I'm just trying to see if there is a diagram in here that I could show you. I think there is somewhere in the book, but I don't remember that. I know I spent some time looking at this alphabet just because I'd also read a book on Linear B, which is an alphabet that was cracked sort of by a lady and a guy that worked in a bank, if I remember right. No, I don't see a diagram here of the various bits of alphabet that I don't know. Anyway, look, it's definitely a good read. It's a worthwhile read. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, buy this book. I've got no affiliation to him. I've emailed with him a few times. I've spoken on the phone. Unfortunately, his wife's been really quite ill, so I haven't had a chance to meet up with him, and I've been busy. But guess what? I think the alphabet is on the outside, just on the edge of the book. There, you've got like some of those symbols. It's just upsetting me that I'm sure there's a page in here that has got a diagram, but I know because I'd printed copies of it, or maybe I found it somewhere else. I can't remember. Anyway, the thing is that he talks about is that and that nobody knew about, and I didn't know about, was that about 300 years ago or so, a huge chunk of Portugal just went bloop and went under the water. And pretty much everybody that was living on that chunk of land, which was a really big piece of land, died pretty much instantly, because it happened pretty much instantly. So that area of the world is tectonically very unstable and can have these sudden, huge tsunamis accompanied by a chunk of land just disappearing under the water, which is pretty much what sort of happened to Atlantis, according to the legend or the history, who knows. Now, the interesting thing is that this Peter Doherty, Dautre, I'm just going to say Dautre, and if I'm getting it wrong, sorry, Peter. Anyway, this Peter guy, he was trying to get a boat with side sonar to do a scan of the Portuguese coast, because he reckons that that's where the remains of Atlantis are. This fisherman had exactly that sonar he was looking for fish, and he found this pyramid that's about 60 meters tall and about 40 meters down, and it's pretty detailed. If the photographs or if the images that are shown in the news report are accurate, then it's definitely artificial. There's no doubt in my mind. And that would be very, very interesting, especially when you put it in the context of the fact that the other pyramids we have on Earth, especially the ones in Egypt, there was a system of measuring the distances between pyramids and so on that was that is not really discussed, but it's absolutely true and real, and it works. And a lot of those menhirs, those tall stones with Egyptian engravings on them, are actually kind of posts that tell you the location of the other pyramids, of the other cities, and so on. Now, we've got a huge giant pyramid in China called the White Pyramid, which is now in a military zone, and they're growing trees on top of it to hide it. That's bigger than the Great Pyramid. We've got the Great Pyramid in Egypt. We've got massive pyramids in South America. We've got pyramids pretty much all around the globe. And there was a rumor of, and it is just a rumor, I was never able to confirm it, but apparently there were pyramids in some steppes of Russia, and a bunch of them that were just bombed out of existence by the Russian military. Now, that might be a myth. It may be rubbish. I don't know. But we certainly have enough pyramids around this planet, and no clear idea of exactly who built them, when they built them, or how they built them. The Great Pyramid of Egypt, my best guess is that Boval is right, that it was around the 10,000 BC era that it was built. And it is Boval that did that, not Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock is a journalist, let's be very clear about that. Robert Boval is an engineer, and I spoke with him, many years ago. He's a nice man. I quite like Boval. I think he got a little bit attached to the fame that he could get by sort of linking up with Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock I have zero respect for. He is a journalist. He is a plagiarist. And even when he is given all the information literally handed to him in a platter for free, he still gets it wrong. So yeah, I don't put a lot of stock in Graham Hancock. But if we've got pyramids all over the earth, a lot of which we have no idea how they were built, or who built them, or when they built them exactly, and there is plenty of evidence that there is technology related to these pyramids that in some cases we can't replicate today, and in other cases, even if we can replicate it, it really is very difficult to explain, because if the measurements used to create these buildings are a reflection of, shall we say, a geodesic measurement, that is a measurement that is a proportion related to our planet, which indicates that they had a knowledge of the fact that our planet was, a globe spinning, and the dimensions of it, as well as its distance from the sun and moon and so on, because some of these buildings seem to incorporate representations of this in a very, very, very accurate manner. If that's the case, then when you suddenly find pyramids on another planet nearby, well, you have to start thinking, what the hell is going on? And that's why the face on Mars, I think, is a really good repository of generic information, because it really is the first book that sort of has a decent handle on what I think is possibly our real history. And it looks like some of it might be all starting to come out a little bit. It's getting harder and harder, thanks to the internet, to hide a lot of this information, even though, people like Zawi How-Ass, I think some people pronounce it How-Ass, but I just think he is a How-Ass, Zawi. The corrupt, fraudulent, thieving, plagiaristic scum that runs the Giza Plateau. I've already been to the Great Pyramid, so even if he bans me, it's all right. I've been there already. That guy has got, he's obviously hiding a lot of interesting stuff. But there are a bunch of other pyramids that most people don't know about. There's a huge Serbian pyramids in Serbia. There's pyramids all over, literally all over. And there's some pyramids that are so far remote and lost that no one pretty much knows about them. You kind of have to go to old books, and I'm not going to say where, because one of the things that I'm thinking of possibly doing is related to that. Is a sort of an Indiana Jones type of idea that I have discussed a little bit with my new friend, Immortal Nameless Bear. And, to do that sort of trip, to prove certain things, would probably make a very interesting, decent, funny, and exciting documentary. And it's a little bit of a smoking gun for having a level of technology that most normal people are unaware of, simply because of the location of these pyramids, of where they are, and how to get there and so on. So it would be a difficult trip in the sense of getting to the location. It's very difficult to access. But there is certainly historical evidence in some very old books and some very old diaries that these pyramids are in fact there. They do exist, and they were there when people first came to this location. So the idea would be to go to this location, survey this. They're not big pyramids. They're not huge. They're small, but it's just because of where they are, it makes it very, very interesting. So it would be, a documentary documenting the trip there, the survey of these things, photographing them, taking samples if possible to see if we can date them somehow. Obviously, you can't date rock, but there may be some organic material that perhaps could be of interest, stuff like that. And to do that sort of trip would need a minimum of 3, preferably maybe 4 people. It would cost a minimum of between 30 and 40,000 pounds, I would like to say, but maybe you can get away with it with being dollars. And obviously, it's not the kind of money I have lying around or anything. But, and I'm not going to say where or when, because it's an idea I've had in my head for a while. But we're going to look at possibly trying to crowdfund this sort of thing with, something like, if you donate X amount, then you get your name in the credits for being a supporter. And if you put maybe a bit more, you get, autographed DVD copies of the documentary just for you. We'll have to think of something. But, $30,000-$40,000 or pounds or whatever is not it's not a completely crazy number. It's doable. We, at that level of money, nobody would make money out of it. It would just cover the costs. But possibly if you could sell the documentary afterwards, if that were paid for, or if somebody picked it up, some kind of studio or whatever, there could potentially be a return on investment. Although I wouldn't like to sell it as that, because my intention would be just to create it, and then if if you get something extra out of it, well, that's gravy on top. But the idea would be to just do the study. So if you guys are interested in that sort of thing, let me know. I just want to gauge whether there is interest in that sort of thing, and it would also mean time from work for everybody. So I've got some crazy friends which might be able to swing that, but it's not something that I can just get up and go and do. So it would be something that would need a bit of planning and so on. But if there is an interest, I think 30-40 grand is definitely achievable. So it might be an interesting thing to do. You'd be supporting a sort of Indiana Jones adventure, which we would try and help you be part of, simply by the fact that we would mention you, and we'd keep in mind the fact that we would have been helped to do so by others. And I have no problem, selling it as a sort of a crowdfunding thing that is a potential investment if the finished product gets picked up and paid for by somebody. Quite happy to do a share, so there is a small chance that whatever money you've invested, maybe you recoup some of it, or maybe, if it does really well, you get even all of it back, or maybe even more than all of it, who knows. But like most things that I've done in life, I start it and then somehow you get there. So that's an interesting sort of little topic, and it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of Portugal in the next few weeks and months. I'm going to try and see if I can keep track of that, although I do expect that sort of news to just become squashed. And 20-30 years ago, this would have been front page news everywhere. Now it's just like everyone's attention span has been reduced to that of a fruit fly. That's intentional. It's been intentional. If you've read my science fiction books, you'll come across that sort of way of thinking and dealing with things. You'll see that in the science fiction books, I wrote that's what the aim was. And this was only like 8 years ago. And already a lot of the stuff that I was predicting in the books, although my books are set in 1999, so they're predicting it a lot further back, let's say, but in reality I wrote them in 2011, and yet I can already see the effects of what I was saying was the intentional dumbing down of human beings is happening at an incredibly fast pace. And it's becoming a little bit of a split. So there's the moronic, Antifa, left-wing, believe everything, orange man bad type people. And then there's the other people, like the ones that follow this channel for the most part, which are of a different class, have got generally a better level of education, generally a higher IQ, and generally the ability to educate themselves or become educated rather than the inability to be educated. Because we're now at a point where we're surrounded by zombies. The millennial generation is a bunch of zombies that don't know anything. The Zyklons might get to know something, but you still need a baseline formation of logic, maths, statistics. That sort of stuff is important. Ability to read and comprehend. I've got friends that are professors, and they show me some of the work that gets handed in at college and even university level. It's unreadable. I mean, it's unreadable. It's illegible. It's stuff that an illiterate bushman, if you teach him how to read and write for like 3 months, and then you ask him to write an essay on Plato, might come up with. It's literally functionally illiterate people. These are people that can maybe read like Coca-Cola and fries, supersized. That's about the limit of their comprehension level. It's sad. It's very sad and kind of scary, really. So most people, even if Atlantis rose from the waters tomorrow, they'd be like, oh, cool, when can we make a park out of it? Will it be Disney? Because I want to have my large fries and supersized Coke when I go there. That's where we're at. But, those of us that are Catholic, those of us that are educated, we're going to rebuild the city-states. There's a bunch of stuff I want to say on Catholicism, actually. but I'll do a separate video on it. Like Vox recently mentioned some stuff about how he thinks of Vatican III and how he reckons, it probably would be a good thing for priests to be able to be married. And no, Vox is my friend. I love him dearly, but he's absolutely wrong. It is not a good thing for priests to be married. There is a very good reason why priests were made to be celibate in the Catholic Church, and it has worked, and that is why it managed to achieve what it achieved. Anyone that thinks that priests being celibate means they turn gay is crazy, all right? Being a homosexual has got nothing to do with whether you are part of a male-only institution. Now, if you're telling me that homosexual might be more attracted to try and infiltrate that sort of thing, fine, I'll grant you that. Just like pedophiles are more likely to try and become school teachers. That's a fact. But now it doesn't mean that, if you're a school teacher, you're a pedophile. It means pedophiles will tend to try and become school teachers because that's where the kids are. And similarly, homosexuals would be all too happy to infiltrate a male-only situation, whether it's the church, the army, whatever, So Vox is wrong about letting priests get married being a good thing. It's not. He's kind of wrong also about the fact that he understands about there's no link between homosexuality and celibacy, but he also said, well, it's just to grow from a bigger pool of people that are potentially good priests. And again, I disagree with that. Being married and having children brings a whole host of other issues that somebody who is solely dedicated to God would have to deal with and would subtract from their ability to be a good priest. There are good priests. I've met good priests. I have a good priest. And they certainly don't engage in any kind of, they are celibate priests and they're very good at their job. And that is why they're very good at their job, because that is the focus of their life. Obviously, if you're going to be married, you're going to have kids, your focus will be your kids and your marriage, as it should be. So, besides, like I've told all the Protestants friend of mine that I upset when they go like, there's no reason, and in the Bible it says that a deacon should be married and have children and blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of things that you need to understand. First of all, when the church started out, most of the apostles were probably married and probably had kids. So that was just how it was. But, going forward, and Paul was saying, yeah, you need other people to educate and teach people. So they picked whoever was there, and that was fine. And most of these guys would be married or would become married or whatever. But there's two things. Traditionally, it's always been understood that a priest, even if he was married prior, would stop having sex once he became a priest with his wife. So he might be married, but there would be no sexual congress anymore. And so that is traditionally one of the things. The other thing is that the priests were decided to be celibate because Jesus over Paul. And Jesus basically said there are some men whose function is not to be husbands, but to be priests. They're basically eunuchs by either choice or because somebody cut it off or because they're just not that way inclined, and they would be best to dedicate their lives to God. So the thinking essentially is like, well, yes, perhaps a married guy can be a priest, but the best person to be a priest is somebody who doesn't have the worldly attachments to children and family. And those would be people that would be able to dedicate themselves completely to the priesthood. So they would make the best priests. And, historically, look at what the Catholic Church achieved before it got totally infiltrated and converted. And there you go. It's achieved something that no other denomination has or ever will. So it's obviously working. It worked. And what's happening now is what I predicted in one of my early videos, that, the satanic Bergoglians, the Novus Orcans, are now going to push for married priests, and married deacons. Then they're going to push for female deacons and eventually female priests, because, as I've mentioned many times, Vatican II was essentially a Protestant-pushed heresy, and Vatican II was in part written by Protestants, and that's all it is. It's just another, diverting the true church into Protestantism, into the heresy of, satanic nonsense that is Protestantism. So that's that. But I quite like the fact that I've noticed a definite shift in Vox's theology a little bit, and it's definitely leaning toward the Catholic side. I think he's reading Thomas Aquinas, possibly again, because I know he's read it before. He's certainly reading Anne Barnhard, and Barnhard herself has been shifting more and more, slightly edging dangerously close to the Sede Preventionist position, and if you're watching, and it's happening. People are waking up at every level. So E. Michael Jones, unfortunately, is still asleep at the wheel because he thinks Bergoglio is the Pope. And, I don't care what his excuses are for pretending that Vatican II is not completely heretic. It's heretic. Vatican II is obviously heretic. And if you have actually read those documents and then commented on them, and you're still trying to say that Vatican II is not heretical, I'm sorry, but you're either very stupid or a liar. So, and I don't care to figure out which. As far as I'm concerned, I don't want to spend any of my time with very stupid people or liars, or very stupid liars for that matter, because they exist too. So, well, that's that. The pyramids and just some random Catholicism, just for a change. That'll be that for today.